So the last time we were talking about how to carve eggs and make them into artwork, we discussed the process of drilling the eggs and then blowing them out and cleaning them and letting them dry. So we're going to move on to the next step today. And this is an egg that I had done previously. You can see that there's a hole at the bottom, at top and at the bottom. And the next thing that you want to do, as long as it's thoroughly dry, is you want to create some guidelines for yourself. And the way that that's sort of easiest to do, you can do it with string, or you can do it freehand if you really want to. But for the first one, I kind of like to do it by putting a rubber band around the circumference of the egg. And then I take a regular mechanical pencil and just sketch that line. It doesn't have to be neat, it doesn't have to be pretty, it doesn't even have to be particularly exact. It just needs to be where you can reference it. Okay, so we have that. And I'm going to do the same thing by doing it at the top and the bottom. And I'm going to basically just do the exact same process and get a vertical line. And just do that exact same process once again and create a vertical. I love doing live things. The cats are always doing something so entertaining. Do a vertical line that goes up to the top. Okay. So once you have that, you then need to sort of just determine how many lines you want to make. And the way I usually do it is I don't even bother with the rubber band for the rest of it. I just hold the pencil and rotate the egg. Same thing on the top. Again, it doesn't have to be particularly tidy or anything. It just needs to be able to be seen by you. No one's going to see this later. And I also am going to add some additional guidelines vertically. And the amount of guidelines that you need is entirely your preference. It largely depends on what kind of designs you like to make and how symmetrical they need to be. I tend to do these things very loosely because they're not lifelines, they're just guidelines. Okay. And so there you have basically what looks sort of like a wireframe 3D model of an egg, except it's an actual egg. And at this point, you want to decide how you want to design your egg. And if this is, you're first learning how to do this, I would suggest just sort of a polka dot thing. In fact, this egg is the very first one I ever made successfully. It took 9 tries to do it, but it was the first one I ever did. And as you can see, there's no particular rhyme or reason. There's sort of a spiral, swirly thing going on, but it's not incredibly exact. And Rerun is talking to invisible people. Fantastic. So at this stage, you just need to decide how it is that you want to create your egg. And you just want to essentially sketch the design along the egg's surface until you have at least some idea of how you want to do it. I don't necessarily recommend sketching it out completely, like in the final form, because when you rotate it, you're going to smudge all the lines anyway. But it would work. It'll, just have a rough idea, and then come back and finish up whatever sections it is that you'd like to work with first. So after you get that done, you just come back and we'll come on to our next step. Okay, so we're continuing our investigation into how to carve eggs and create art with them, and we are now at the stage where there's a design that is sketched out on the egg itself, and holding it up so you can see. I tend to not do the entire egg at once, because what happens is that as you work, you'll wind up smearing the design that you've created. So as long as you have an idea in your head, I just tend to do it in pieces. So this is the beginnings of my design for this one. And the next step, obviously, is to begin with your drilling process. And this is where bad things can happen. But hopefully they won't happen today. I just tend to pick a spot where I want to start. And with my flexible shaft machine and a small microbit, I go in and I start making holes in the areas that I want to carve. That's an example of 2 holes drilled. I don't actually much like this bit. I don't think it's sharp enough. And I always have like a zillion of them anyway. So we'll see about whether or not I switch this one out for something else. But I'm just going to use an example with 2 of them right now as it stands. So the next thing I do is I now have these 2 holes. Normally I'll do a whole section, but I'm trying to make this not last forever. And I have these 2 holes on the side here, and I'm just going to make them bigger. Okay, and so now I have these 2 that are larger. And in essence, all I will really do is just continue working in this way, drilling pilot holes in one section at a time, and then drilling the holes out and making them as big as they need to be in order for me to create the pattern that I want. I have various sizes here. None of these holes in this particular design are very big, but I have larger cone files, which you can see. This one and this one here, which is much bigger, that allow me to create much larger holes in diameter. But this design won't call for any of that. It'll all be pretty small. They don't necessarily need to be perfectly exact, nor do they need to be perfectly round. And the thing that you need to not worry about is that there's a membrane on the inside of the egg, and you don't have to worry about that right now. We're going to take care of that. So if you see it and it's sort of blocking your egg hole, don't worry about that. That's going to be okay. Just ignore it. The larger the holes are, the more difficult it's going to be to create them close together. So if you're doing large holes, I would suggest spacing them out a bit wider. And if it breaks, that happens. It's sort of a lesson in kind of patience, because sometimes they really will break. The first time I ever did one of these, it took me 9 times in order to get one that didn't shatter. And to this day, there will be times where I will do one after the other, and they just break. They break most often for me on the very last hole. It's the most frustrating thing in the world. I'll have 500 holes in something, and the very last one is the one that takes it out. But just remember that when you have a lot of small holes, it acts like a perforated object, so that area becomes very susceptible to pressure. This becomes difficult when you start needing to rotate the egg and do the other side, because this side will already be removed in terms of material, so it's much more fragile. So you have to really be careful and learn a method of holding the egg really kind of at the top and bottom, rather than your instinct, which is to put pressure on the sides as you carve, because otherwise it's going to break. So this is how you do it. You basically drill a pilot hole for every hole that you have, big or small, and then you go in with a larger cone file. If you're working with a larger egg and doing layered effects, which again we're not doing here, you wind up using a lot of burrs, and I have some burrs, although these aren't necessarily the ones that you would use for, do I have burrs here? Yeah. Like a burr, like this sort of example, in this example here. There's many of them, and they come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, some more useful than others. But those are really good to get layered effects where you're not going to go through the entire surface of the egg, but are going to carve out just a layer of its surface and then leave the rest of it, so it becomes translucent rather than completely carved through. But for chicken eggs, it won't work. They're too thin. If you're a beginner at this, I would suggest learning how to do this in the cooler months in the winter, because eggs are thicker then, the shells are thicker. In the summertime, they tend to be thinner. But basically, this is what you're going to do. You're going to take your design, whatever that is, it can be anything, and you're just going to drill pilot holes and then come back and put your larger holes in. And once that's done, we will come back to this and talk about what do you do about that membrane on the inside of the egg.